Do you think you already understand the children born into the British royal family? Perhaps you have only seen the surface. Because King Charles III is not only the monarch of a thousand-year empire, he is also the father of two children, one of whom is living a completely different life. William grew up under the expectation of succession. Harry stepped into life with a title no one wants, the spare. One learned how to stand firm under the gaze of an entire nation. The other chose to step away from the light to protect himself. Behind it all are hidden losses, pressures no one speaks about, and chapters of life the royal family has never acknowledged. This story is not like anything you have heard before. And what happened between them is the part that leaves people silent when they learn the truth. Number 2. William Arthur Philip Lewis was born in 1982. He is the eldest son of Charles and Diana. He was born into love but raised under flashing lights. At just 9 months old, he was carried by his parents on their tour of Australia. The moment the world first saw him was also the moment the world never looked away again. A child who could not yet speak had to smile before thousands of people. A child who could not yet walk became the face of the royal family on a long international tour. And from that moment on, William's life was no longer a blank page. It was an open book, open to Britain and open to the world. A childhood that ended before it had the chance to begin. The real tragedy is that William understood this very early. He grew up with the awareness that every moment, even simple childhood joy, could become the evening news. From the days at Wetherby to the days at Ludgrove, the shadow of the media followed him everywhere. Paparazzi stood at the school gates, cameras pointed from every direction. Sometimes he tried to smile, sometimes he avoided them. But every small reaction was examined, interpreted, and exaggerated. From a very young age, William knew that his privacy would never be whole again. Then, one day at Ludgrove, a classmate accidentally struck him on the forehead with a golf club. A very ordinary childhood accident. The small scar quickly became a national story. William looked at himself in the mirror and saw a mark no one wanted. But deep down, he understood something larger. This was not just a wound. It was a symbol of everything he would face for the rest of his life. Injuries that could never be hidden. Private moments that would never again belong only to him. He began to fear the spotlight instinctively. Not a fear of crowds, but a fear of being seen too much, too closely, for too long. A quiet fear that followed him throughout his growing years. And then came 1997, bringing the greatest tragedy of his life. Diana died in a car crash in Paris. William was 15, old enough to understand grief, yet not old enough to carry it before the world. The image of him and Harry walking silently behind their mother's coffin became one of the most heartbreaking moments of the century. No tears, no words, no permission to collapse. Only walking, in a silence so heavy it felt like stone pressing into the chest. That was not only the day he lost his mother, it was the day he understood that from then on, his private pain would also be pain witnessed by the world. No place to hide, no time to retreat. William had to grow up at the very moment when a child should have been held in someone's arms. But that was still not the most challenging part. Because after Diana's death, the world looked at William as the living legacy of his mother. People searched for Diana in his eyes. They wanted him to continue her compassion. They wanted him to be like Diana, warm and approachable while still being a perfect Windsor. Ceremonial, disciplined, and dutiful. A contradictory demand. A two-sided pressure pulling at the heart of a teenager who had just lost his mother. William tried to balance both, but an invisible fear always lurked within him. The fear that he was not good enough to honor her. A fear that made him more cautious than others, calmer than his age, always keeping his emotions one safe step away. He continued his education at Eton, a school that shaped generations of British leaders. There, William blended in but was never too loud. Not because he lacked confidence, but because he kept himself within the lines of expectation. An heir is not allowed to fail, not allowed to rebel, not allowed to be careless. But at Eton, William found rare moments of normality. Football matches with friends, evenings laughing in the dormitory. Small things, yet they were the very form of freedom he longed for. Then William moved on to the University of St. Andrews, and there, for the first time, He lived without being recognized everywhere. He was called by the friendly name Will Wales. He stood in line at the supermarket. He walked in the rain without cameras following him, and it was at St. Andrews that William met Catherine Middleton. Their love had no scandal, no media explosion, no royal drama. It was calm, steady, and sure, as a breath of air returned to him after years of loss. But even that peace could not last forever. Because William's destiny was still unfolding, after university, he joined the military, where every prince must become a soldier before becoming a leader. Sandhurst was harsh. But in that harshness, William saw the real world. Not a ceremony, not royal robes, not the spotlight, but sweat, responsibility, human lives. Later, as a search and rescue helicopter pilot, William often flew into storms, landing in treacherous locations to rescue people. It was a time when he discovered something he had long doubted he possessed, meaning beyond being a prince. But that journey eventually led him back to a greater destiny. In 2022, when Charles ascended the throne, William became Prince of Wales, the final step before the crown. That moment was not just a ceremony, it was a profound experience. It was a shift from someone standing behind the light to someone who must now stand at its center. No one left to stand behind, no supporting role. William had become the face of the new generation of Windsors, a generation that must carry Diana's legacy without losing Charles's tradition, a generation that must speak to the young while preserving the weight of the monarchy. Today, William lives with Catherine and their 3 children, George, Charlotte, and Louis. Their family feels unusually ordinary for the royal family, but that normality is not accidental. It is a choice. William wants his children to have what he never had: privacy, freedom to stumble, freedom to grow without scrutiny. He cannot reclaim his own childhood. Instead, he gives it to his children, and that is his way of healing. William's legacy is slowly taking form, not through grand speeches, not through glittering moments, but through steadiness. Through his calm voice when speaking about mental health, through environmental projects, through listening to young people, through living without needing to become a legend like Diana or a shadow of Charles, by being himself, quietly but persistently. People often ask whether William can escape Diana's shadow, but perhaps the better question is whether he can turn pain into leadership. Quiet, but deep, so that the next generation does not have to walk the same path. And the answer is present in the eyes of his 3 children, in his steadiness, and in every step William chooses. Slow, certain, and never stopping. Number 1. Henry Charles Albert David was born in 1984. From his earliest days, Harry carried a label he said he had heard since childhood and never forgot: the Spare. A name that sounded like a joke, yet quietly placed him in the position of standing behind, long before he understood what life meant. And tragedy arrived earlier than any child should ever endure. When Harry was 12 years old, he lost his mother. But the haunting did not begin when she died. It began years earlier when he was still small, sitting in the back seat of the car, watching Diana wipe away her tears as crowds of photographers chased after her, the sound of camera shutters firing like hail hitting the windows. It was a suffocating feeling, as if he were witnessing something terrible that he was powerless to stop. One night in that same car, while driving through a tunnel, the light brushed across Diana's face. She turned back and gave him a gentle smile to reassure him. A smile Harry carried for many years afterward, because it was the last image he remembered before the world collapsed. And then the news struck. Diana died in Paris. 2 children walked behind their mother's coffin on the streets of London. William was 15. Harry was 12. No tears, no words, only steps, because people expected them to be strong, to set an example, to be symbols. But Harry was just a boy who had lost his mother, and he had to learn how to swallow grief in front of millions of eyes. From that moment, his life took a new direction. The world saw Harry as the second son, the mischievous younger brother. But no one saw the long nights he hid in his room. No one heard him slam his fist against the wall because he didn't know where to place his pain. When emotions have no outlet, they can fracture into impulsive actions, youthful mistakes, or scandalous photos that the press clings to as proof of a rebellious child. But no one asked what he was trying so hard to escape. Harry grew up in a royal world filled with protocol, where every action was scrutinized. But he was a child who loved freedom, who loved breaking the mold, who loved running more than standing still. And that difference made him feel he had to find a place where he truly belonged, somewhere outside the ancient walls of the palace. He found that place in the army. There, for the first time in his life, he was not a prince. No one called him the spare. He stood shoulder to shoulder with other soldiers, sharing the same duties, the same risks, the same dangers. Night shifts, helicopter blades cutting through the sky, missions in harsh conditions. These became the years he called the most real of his life. But war always leaves marks. When he returned, Harry carried memories that could not be easily put into words. Nights jolting awake at loud noises. Moments of suffocation when camera flashes reminded him of Diana being chased. Bursts of anger he struggled to control. These were the dark fragments that followed him for many years. And then, among the shadows, a small light appeared. Harry began opening himself to life outside the royal household. He created the Invictus Games to support wounded veterans, men and women who carry injuries the world often does not see. When he saw athletes missing limbs standing on the field, running with strength and willpower, Harry saw himself in them. Broken pieces that could still rise when someone reached out a hand. And then Meghan appeared, not as a star, but as someone who saw his true self. Someone who did not look at him as a title, but as a man trying to escape unnamed pain. But that love opened a new, tense chapter. Press intrusion, malicious rumors, quiet divisions about race and background. And in those days, Meghan said she could no longer endure the pressure, and Harry felt pulled back into the past. He heard his mother's voice in memory. Heard footsteps running through the tunnel. I heard the camera shutters echoing like alarm bells. And he knew he could not lose another woman he loved. So he decided to leave the royal family. The world called it Megxit, but for Harry, it was a run for love. A decision to protect his small family, to ensure he would not watch another tragedy repeat itself. Leaving the royal family was not an ending. It opened a storm of its own. Interviews, revelations never spoken publicly before, old chapters reopened, new controversies are rising. Harry knew every word he said could shake the country, but he chose to speak because 30 years of silence had already cost him too much. Not to seek revenge, he said, but to avoid being swallowed by the pain again. Today, Harry lives in California. Far from Britain, far from the palace, far from the expectations that pressed on him since childhood. He devotes his time to his 2 children, to projects that support the vulnerable, and to stories that help others understand that pain is not shameful. But the past still follows him like a shadow. Sometimes he has to stop and breathe deeply, just to keep the darkness from swallowing him. What separates Harry's life from William's is here. William was born to maintain balance. Harry was born to break the balance. William stands in the light. Harry runs from the light. And that difference gives Harry's story its own rhythm. Wild, fractured, healing, breaking again, trying to heal again. If his legacy must be narrowed to 3 truths, they may be these. He forced the world to look directly at how cruel the media can be to the human behind the title. He helped millions find the courage to speak about the pain inside them. And he proved that even someone called the Spare can write his own chapter, with his own feet and his own heart. His story ends with a question. Not whether he will return to the royal family, but rather, what is he still not telling? And does he have the courage to face it? Because Harry's journey, clearly, is far from over.